Hey everyone, James here. Today going to be talking about a genre near and dear to my heart and one that I've gotten into probably about 3 years ago. And yeah, I tend to get into these genres and just do big deep dives on them. And I did a deep dive, and this is a genre that, I've come back to. I've drawn from the well again. There's a few favorites here. And that genre is one of the great Italian genres of the 60s and 70s and 80s. Specifically in the 1970s, the Poliziotteschi Eurocrime film. So probably one of the lesser known of the Italian genres, maybe not quite to the level of Peplum, but definitely sort of ranking beneath spaghetti westerns and gialli films. And so just wanted to talk about a few things that really make this genre pop for me personally. And the first thing, and this one it shares with a lot of these Italian films, specifically gialli and spaghetti westerns, is the soundtracks. And part of that is because Italy absolutely had some of the absolute best world-class talent working there at the time. So if you want to see like a grindy B-house pulpy movie, and all of a sudden it's just has this magnificent score while people are robbing a bank, this is absolutely the genre for you. Just some trashy action, but some absolute masterclass scoring going here. So Ennio Morricone, Luis Bacalov, a lot of just great European talent working on films during this era. So I am a fan of a lot of Italian films, but this sort of just the talent that they had scoring their films is just one of the best during this time. Another thing that probably shares more with gialli than spaghetti westerns is just like the 1970s Italy. And gialli, you're sort of getting this like over here, so maybe middle and upper class. And for Eurocrime, Poliziotteschi films, it's a little bit more over here. It's a little bit more, you get a lot more exterior shots, you get a little bit less interiors, and when they are, it's not really your like middle and upper class people that you see in giallis, although you might get just a taste of that. You're getting more of like the lower rung people and stuff like that. So I just love the European settings, specifically the exteriors when it comes to these films. Just imagine like very low budget car chases going through these just like gorgeous streets in Milan or Genoa and places like that. So for me, the European setting is just very, very friendly or very, very well suited towards the crime genre. And yeah, within that too, I would say those two things are definitely a couple of things that just sort of stack the deck to make these Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films just really, really good. The fact that they can, even with sort of like B-grade stuff, even like just lower level direction and stuff like that, you can still have an absolutely great time if you just nail some of these like very basic settings and like the soundtrack. And so for me at least, when I'm watching a lot of these films, as I have for gialli, spaghetti westerns, and Poliziotteschi's, when you get into sort of like the 45th or 50th best of these films, for me, I start to lose interest when it comes to spaghetti westerns, just a little bit too much cookie cutter-ish stuff going on. But when it comes to gialli and Poliziotteschi's, when you just have all of these things going for it, I can have a great time even in sort of the most generic plots. And then you add in some really good action, which we'll get to later, another thing that these Italian films really excelled at, and a little bit of like sleaze if you're in the mood for spicy. Then you can just really have a great time with something that would otherwise be just a very disposable product. Another thing that I really like about this, so kind of one of my other big points, is the social commentary done in kind of a genre setting. So less of like your art house, we have a message to sell, and more of just like these are genre films, but we also have something to say. And it's not necessarily always well done, but there's always a lens, and it's always a little bit interesting to look at. I mean, of course, it can vary a bit. I think the masters of kind of more of like having something to say within the medium are people like Damiano Damiani, Sergio Salima did a couple good ones. So a lot of these crime films took place in what is called in Italy as the Years of Lead, and it kind of starts out in 1968, and that's really also when this genre started to pick up steam. It's basically like this long period where there were a number of political assassinations, just a lot of crime, a lot of political turmoil going on in Italy, and a lot of these films being set in more contemporary settings and also focusing a lot on just crime, tend to focus on those things. And so we need to get a premise for an idea, we'll just draw it straight from the headlines. So a lot of these films too, one thing that's mentioned in a very good documentary on these films, Eurocrime, by Mike Malloy, is that they were just cranking out films too during this period. So part of that is because TVs at the time were not very good, so that you would only get one or two things there. So it was very much the cultural norm in Italy to go to see a film, oftentimes multiple times a week. So there was a high demand to just be cranking out stuff. And so that's one thing that I really like about these films, is that like there's a certain like spontaneity and carelessness almost that comes into just making these films, where there's just almost like a creativity from throwing so much stuff against the wall. Some stuff works better than others, but oftentimes you get a product that you probably wouldn't have if you had just a bunch of David Finchers and Stanley Kubricks cranking out films every 6 or 7 years or something like that. For instance, I'll get to that too when I get to the action. So often just very spontaneous and impulsive in a very good way, in a way that really doesn't reek of perfectionism. The one other aspect that I think Italy absolutely was one of the best places, and I think these things still hold up today as being world-class, are the car chases and the car stunts. For me personally, I am not a huge fan of CG and the way that car stunts are done today. I would much prefer kind of like this older school style of stunts. One of the big films, along with Dirty Harry, that really influenced the Poliziotteschi genre is French Connection, and to a lesser extent, Bullet. But those films, French Connection and Dirty Harry, really helped to kick off the genre. Dirty Harry, a lot in kind of the obvious ways of having like a tough guy cop coming around and beating up criminals, and these films can often borderline on almost fascist. They often have something to say in a way that maybe hasn't aged the best depending on the audience. On the other hand, French Connection, one thing that they took away is just the great car chases. And French Connection, I think, holds up great today. And that's not a very particularly high-budget film even for the 1970s. Certainly higher budget than these films. But all this to say that oftentimes if you have a good idea, good conception, and good execution in a place where you don't even have to pay for permits, you can end up with something absolutely very good that I think can often be quite a bit better than action scenes today. For instance, today I rewatched the Poliziotteschi by Fernando De Leo. That's not even necessarily one of his best, but, a pretty good one, Shoot First, Die Later. And there are two chase scenes that I would put over the Batman's chase scene, which was done just this year, and they actually tried to do it fairly practically. And I actually think it's a decent scene. But for me, at least, the scenes from these cars and the way that they are just rolling around Italy, these often little tiny cars going into the water and stuff like that, for me, I much prefer that. Another place I really like the sort of genre center from is like the contemporary action thrillers in Hong Kong in the 1980s. I think in a lot of ways, especially in the hand-to-hand combat, those films really do beat these Poliziotteschi films. But the Italians, they nailed the car chases, and I think these scenes in particular really hold up well. So if that sounds appealing, a little bit of social commentary and some great car chases with a great European setting and great soundtracks, I think you really have the foundation for some spectacularly entertaining and fun films, and films that I can personally come back to at least a few times. Okay, so that moves me into kind of the recommendation part of this. So just going to list a few basic ones. If you're only into the Poliziotteschi genre, Eurocrime, you've probably already seen these, but wanted to give them a shout nevertheless. First up would be Caliber 9 from Fernando De Leo. Fernando De Leo is a filmmaker that probably had a large impact in influencing Quentin Tarantino, specifically kind of his earlier films. He has a very pulp sensibility. A lot of his films are based off of like American noir or even just like American source material, and he just sort of translates that into Italy. Has a lot of the great characteristics of the genre, but he would definitely be one of the ones I would shout out. So specifically Caliber 9, but also the whole Milieu trilogy. De Leo has probably done 7 or 8 in kind of the early to mid 70s that I would say are very much worth checking out. So he would definitely be a director, and Caliber 9 would be a film that I would recommend. Another different flavor that you would get is Almost Human. This one's directed by Umberto Lenzi, who is one of those directors who was very much satisfying the demand to create a lot of films in a very short amount of time, directing a lot of movies. This is, I believe, one of the early ones he did. He's basically kind of known to be very misanthropic, just a very low level of humanity you're going to get if you see quite a few Umberto Lenzi films. This one in particular, I think, is notable because it has just a total ridiculous, worried about your mental health performance by Tomas Milian, which I think is absolutely one of the best performances you're going to get out of this genre. He is in spaghetti westerns just a decade earlier. He's one of those actors that actually appeared in almost all of the major Italian genres at the time, but this is a performance that really needs to be seen to be believed, and it's very, very worth watching, and very, very different from Fernando de Leo and his Milieu trilogy. More on the social consciousness side, if you are less into like the pulpiness or just the sadism, Confessions of a Police Captain and Revolver both kind of really have more of a social message and are a little classier in the way they go about it. Damiano Damiani is definitely worth mentioning as a notable director when it comes to these films. Always a fairly intelligent approach to these films. He directed Confessions of a Police Captain. Fans of spaghetti westerns might know him for A Bullet for the General. And I feel like his films just often are some of the more well thought out and scripted, and they might supply a little bit less of the visceral car chase thrills, but they are very much worth watching. And I like a good deal many of his films, so he made a number of them in this period. Revolver was done by Sergio Salima, probably a top 5 Poliziotteschi for me. Salima wasn't quite as active in the genre as Damiani, but this one is in particular well worth checking out. And I kind of put it with that Damiani camp in the sense that it feels a little bit above the material compared to some of the lowlifes like Umberto Lenzi working in other films. Okay, and the last one I wanted to shout out is The Big Racket by Enzo G. Castellari. I think Castellari is probably the best, or at least one of the best at staging action and just kind of showing that. And Big Racket, I think, has the best there. So it stars Fabio Testi, has some great stunts to it, some great scenes, and it's just kind of a fun romp. It can also be quite dark at times, but it's got some cool modern music to it, and I think is definitely one of my favorites of the genre. He's made basically three big ones. This one, Street Law, and High Crime, and all of them are definitely worth checking out. Probably my favorite is Big Racket, though. All right, so that concludes this video. Let me know what Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films you've seen and how you like this video. I'll see you all next time.